Hey guys, I'm Mountain Fiber, and in this video I'm going to be sharing with you how I made this mid-1920s dress based on an extant garment. I created this dress as a pattern tester for the Plus Pattern project, which is an offshoot of the Museum at the Fashion Institute of Technology's exhibition on 1920s and 1960s fashion called Roaring and Swinging. That exhibition is virtual and it's been up since about March 15th, so if you want to check it out, I will include the link down below. This is one of several dresses which were patterned, and those patterns are available for free, and I will also link that down below. It's really exciting because they include such a wide range of sizes. This is a 38-inch bust and a 43 hip, which fits me absolutely perfectly. This is one of the garments that I'm the most proud of all the things I've made, and I hope you'll enjoy the process. The dress I chose to pattern test was the Refashioned dress, a handmade beaded knit dress from circa 1925, which was refashioned during the 1960s. The waist was raised, and several folds and tucks were created, obscuring the original design. I wanted to restore the dress to the way it looked in the 1920s, and try my hand at some of the beading too, which has this lovely, flowing, organic, geometric pattern. As a pattern tester, I received access to a Google Drive folder including printable PDFs of the pattern pieces and beading templates, as well as photographs of the original garment and detailed construction notes. The notes and photographs helped guide my choices while reconstructing this dress, and for the most part I followed the example of the original, except where it was impractical. I printed out the pattern pieces, which I then taped together and cut out. Off camera, I made a mock-up of the pattern and discovered that the waist was too low, so I raised the bottom edge of the bodice by about 2 inches, which hit at exactly the right place on my hip for a mid-1920s look. Having the grid included in the pattern itself made any alterations extremely easy. Then I traced the pattern onto my fabric, a wool gauze which I got from my local Mill End store, which is semi-sheer and has incredible drape. I used about 2 yards. I marked out a 5/8 inch seam allowance on all the pieces except the skirt, which has a 2-inch seam allowance already included. First, I pinned the front and back bodice pieces together, wrong sides together, and finished them using French seams as in the original. Then I sewed up the side seams, also using French seams. This had the additional benefit of helping to prevent the wool crepe from fraying. The skirt side seams are very interesting in the original. Each edge was folded in about 2 inches, and then the folded edges were overlapped slightly and top stitched in place. I recreated this for my version just for fun, and I really liked the effect it had. The interior raw edges were pressed in about a 1/4 inch, and then, while doing the beading along the sides of the skirt, those folded edges were occasionally caught by the beading, holding them in place. While I was working on this project, we began to get some snowfall, which was very conducive to cozy sewing. Next, I attached the skirt to the bottom of the bodice. The original pleating pattern of this dress has been lost since its refashioning in the 1960s involved separating the skirt and bodice and raising the waist quite significantly. With the width of the skirt as my only reference point, I fussed around with the front and back side pleats until I was satisfied. I ended up going with 2 1-inch-ish pleats per side facing inwards at both the front and back of the skirt, starting about 4 inches inwards from each of the side seams. The footage I got, however, shows me doing something which was incorrect and which I later ripped out and corrected. Then it was time to take a little break and make some self-fabric bias tape. I used this as both a decorative and a practical seam finish. To create a subtle decorative effect around the neckline, I pinned my bias tape along the outside of the neck, then folded it inwards towards the interior of the neck, with just a little bit of the bias tape showing above the edge of the neckline. Then I top stitched inwards about 1/8 of an inch to secure it in place. The sleeves I sewed together using French seams. In the original, the sleeves were hand sewn into position, which I did for my version as well, which gave me a little bit more control of the easing over the sleeve head. Since the original fabric was a stretch knit and mine is a plain weave, I think I should have allowed for more room in the shoulder and armscye, since they are a little tight on me, but I didn't realize this until it was too late to fix. Then I trimmed off any excess seam allowance so I could bind the sleeve holes with bias tape. I was on kind of a seam finishing kick, so I worked on the raw edge, joining the skirt and bodice together. Since in the original garment, it's impossible to tell what the seam finish was, I chose to do a faux French seam, where I trimmed the raw edges, pressed them inwards, and then whip-stitched them together by hand, since it was easier and didn't add too much bulk. For the hem, I sewed on bias tape right sides together, then folded it in half and whip-stitched it down by hand on the wrong side, creating a sort of narrow band. This can also be seen in the original dress, and it adds another subtle decorative element. Now it was finally time to do some beading. So here are all the beads that I'm going to be using for this project. I have this nice silk beading thread that I'm going to use to sew them on with. These are my seed beads, 11-0 dynamites from Matsuno, Japan. And they are faceted seed beads with this blue iris sort of iridescence to them, which matches, I think, the most closely the ones that are on the original garment. And then, this is what I really had trouble finding. I had trouble finding what these, they were called rhinestones in the pattern notes, what these even are. And I couldn't find any new ones, but I eventually narrowed it down. These are faceted nail head beads, glass with the same iridescent sort of iris, and these are definitely vintage. Usually they're from Germany, Czech Republic, sort of, or France, and these are probably not from the 1920s. These are probably like a little bit later than that, but they are definitely vintage from the first half of the 20th century, and I got 3 strands of 25, which wasn't actually all that expensive. Fortunately, I found someone who supplied them in the United States on Etsy, which I'll link down below. They're not that easy to find affordably, and these are 8mm wide, and I think these are definitely the closest that I could find. And they match so well! Oh my gosh, I am so excited to use these. To transfer the beading pattern, I punctured each of the marked bead placements using an awl on a semi-soft surface, which helped the awl pierce fully through the paper. The template I'm working on right now is the center hem beading pattern. Then, on a harder surface, in this case a book which I placed under the fabric, I used a chalk pencil to mark each of the bead placements. If this seems incredibly fussy, that's because it is. It would have been much easier overall to just trace out the lines of the pattern and then sew beads along that, but I really loved the idea of creating a completely accurate replica of the original beading. Did I begin to question my choices as I got further along in the process? Yes. The disadvantage to using chalk as opposed to other marking methods such as friction pens is that chalk tends to rub off with handling, and unfortunately, in order to bead the fabric, you have to handle it. So I ended up having to mark and then remark a lot of the beading pattern. To sew on the beads, I used a simple running stitch, with each top stitch securing a bead in place. Occasionally, I backstitched as a sort of failsafe. To attach the nailhead accent beads, I stitched each bead in place. I stitched each bead in place several times until they felt secure, then just ran the thread along the back of the fabric up to where I was going to attach the next one. In this clip, I'm beading the neckline, one of the last parts of the dress I worked on. As you can see, my speed has increased enormously with practice. And here's the finished beading. I didn't create a back closure, unlike in the original, since the dress slipped easily enough over my head and I didn't feel like bothering. But there are instructions for a back closure in the pattern notes. The 1920s silhouette is surprisingly flattering, and it feels incredible to have a dress which passes, at least to my eyes, as an actual antique garment, but new and wearable and strong. I loved seeing this refashioned dress come to life as it originally would have been circa 1925, and I hope you guys did too. Check out the Roaring and Swinging virtual exhibition at the FIT Museum, or try your hand at making this dress, or any other dress from one of the free patterns included in the Plus Pattern project. I'm already scheming about which one I'm going to make next. See you in the next video!